Good morning. I'm Captain Liz Garza, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to provide a presentation on Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. As a Korean American Air Force officer, celebrating this month with everyone here at JIDF South is something very special to me. Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month dates back to the 95th Congress when 5 joint resolutions were introduced proposing that a week in May be designated to commemorate Asian American and Pacific Islander accomplishments. In 1978, President Carter recognized the first 10 days of May as Asian Pacific Heritage Week. In 1992, President Bush extended the celebration to cover the entire month of May, which commemorates the arrival of the first Japanese immigrants to the US on May 10, 1843. May also marks the anniversary of the transcontinental railroad completion on May 10, 1869, which could not have been accomplished without the labor of Chinese immigrants. Although 15,000 to 20,000 Chinese immigrants made major contributions to the construction of the transcontinental railroad, they've been largely ignored by history. After only a few hundred responses were received from white laborers to construct the railroad, Central Pacific Railroad Director Charles Crocker recommended hiring Chinese workers. However, many opposed this due to anti-Chinese sentiment amid the gold rush and the perception that Chinese immigrants were too weak to do the job. Chinese workers hired in 1864 were paid $26 a month, working 6 days a week. They also received 30 to 50% lower wages than whites for the same job and had the most difficult and dangerous work, including tunneling and the use of explosives. They eventually held an 8-day strike in June of 1867, which scared Central Pacific Railroad leaders into improving working conditions after the strike. Since the days of the Transcontinental Railroad until now, Asian Americans have continued to struggle with being branded as perpetual foreigners. The perpetual foreigner stereotype entails the idea that Asian Americans are associated with being foreign no matter how Americanized they are, which serves as the premise for racist attacks against Asians during the pandemic. Subsequently, many Asian Americans have become stigmatized as a foreign threat, carrying a virus that has left millions dead and ravaged economies around the world. From March 2020 to March 2021, Stop Asian American and Pacific Islander Hate has reported over 3,800 racist incidents against Asian Americans. According to the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University, Asian hate crimes have surged by 149% in the 15 largest US cities from 2019 to 2020. During this time period, Asian hate crimes skyrocketed by 833% in New York and by 200% in Philadelphia and Long Beach. There are a myriad of examples of how commonplace these hate crimes have become, to include a Southeast Asian American family in Texas who was stabbed by a man because he thought they were Chinese and infecting people. Among those attacked, one was 2 years old and the other was 6 years old. A Vietnamese American man in Pennsylvania was called the coronavirus and brutally assaulted, and a Korean American woman had acid thrown on her face in Brooklyn while taking out the trash. Asian American restaurants across the country are being vandalized with messages like coronavirus and go back to China. These incidents are not random, but part of a growing trend. The perception that Asian Americans are foreigners is perpetuated by stereotypes and rhetoric that brand Asians as aliens spanning over centuries, which include US legislation that banned Asian immigrants. Upon their arrival in the mid-1800s, Chinese immigrants were referred to as the Yellow Peril, coming to ruin America. The US government retaliated against Chinese immigrants with a slew of legislation like the infamous Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which banned the entry of more immigrants from China, revoked citizenship for their descendants, and prohibited their ability to own land and to naturalize. Bans on Asian immigrants to the US were also perpetuated by the Johnson-Reed Act, which was signed into law in 1924 by President Coolidge. This law established a permanent race-based quota system for immigration to America and excluded Asians and Africans. While 29% of the respondents for the aforementioned 3,800 Asian hate incidents were male, 68% were female. According to a professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State University, the coalescence of racism and sexism, including the stereotype that Asian women are meek and subservient, likely factors into this disparity. As a result of this, Asian women are perceived as easier targets for hate crimes. Furthermore, this perception has served as a platform for physical, emotional, and psychological violence against Asian American women who are fetishized, harassed, raped, filmed without their permission, trafficked, and even murdered. Soon Chung Park, Hyunjung Grant, Sunsha Kim, Yong Yu, Jiji Tan, and Dai Feng were the latest victims of this violence and were murdered in cold blood on March 16th in Atlanta. In response to a breaking news tweet about their murders, some Twitter users made sexually charged jokes about their deaths. Sadly, this is the world we live in, where women of Asian descent are stereotyped sexually and then joked about when they're murdered. The Page Act of 1875, which has often been discussed in the wake of the Atlanta murders, prohibited the importation of unfree laborers and women brought for immoral purposes. This law was passed during a time of anti-Chinese hate and restricted Asian immigration based on the idea that Chinese women themselves, through their alleged actions of prostitution, were immoral. Furthermore, when the Georgia shooter confessed to having a sex addiction, we must see this as linked to the way in which Asian women have been constructed as historically sexually available, fetishized, and dehumanized. In response to the crimes, on March 19th, President Biden and Vice President Harris called for the U.S. to unite against hate and speak out against violence targeting Asian Americans in an address in Atlanta. During this address, Biden condemned the ongoing crisis of gender-based and anti-Asian violence that has long plagued the U.S. and urged Congress to swiftly pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which would expedite the federal, state, and local government response to the rise of hate crimes exacerbated during the pandemic. On April 23rd, the Senate voted overwhelmingly to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. Now we'll watch a short video demonstrating the implications for Asian American women.
He looked at my name tag and asked, "What's your real name?" I tell him that Cindy is what's printed on my birth certificate. Ever since I was little, I was made invisible in physical and emotional ways. On Franklin Avenue, he bumps into me and says, "Watch where you're going."
They see us as very quiet, not very outspoken, almost as if we fade into the background.
In an IKEA parking lot, I yield. He signals me to roll down the window of my U-Haul truck, laughs. Not too bad for an Asian woman.
Asian women are not weak. Asian women are not timid. Asian women are not quiet.
I hear my therapist call me beautiful and call himself colorblind.
They don't want something different from what they're used to, and that kind of forces Asian women to kind of shift towards American, beauty standards, social standards.
My friend has brain cancer and enrolled in a clinical trial. He asked if I would sleep with him before he died. There is a sense that we always owe something more, that we should accommodate to what other people need. If it's not given immediately, there's a sort of punishment or withdrawal of a relationship to pay for that.
So I think the first generation, like my mother's generation and my grandparents, they did keep to themselves. So you never heard from them. They were hiding not because they were afraid or anything. They were just independent. For some reason, this past year, they think all the Asians should go home, wherever home may be. But they don't know that home is here.
No justice! No justice!
I wish Americans or just people would see Asian women as other people. At the root of it all, we are all human beings. We all have families. We all have loved ones. We all want to be happy. We all care about other people.
We'll watch one more short video, which this time shows how the U.S. presidential administration is addressing anti-Asian violence in our country.
Well, whatever the motivation, we know this. Too many Asian Americans have been walking up and down the streets and worrying, waking up each morning the past year feeling their safety, the safety of their loved ones are at stake. They've been attacked, blamed, scapegoated, harassed. They've been verbally assaulted, physically assaulted, killed. It's been a year of living in fear for their lives, just to walk down the street. Grandparents are afraid to leave their homes. Small business owners targeted and gunned down. Attacks on some of the most vulnerable people in our nation, the elderly, low-wage workers and women. In fact, Asian American women suffer twice as many incidents of harassment and violence as Asian American men. But for all the good the laws can do, we have to change our hearts. Hate can have no safe harbor in America. It must stop. It's on all of us together, to make it stop.
Asian Americans have been attacked and scapegoated. People who are perceived as Muslim know what it was like to live in our country after 9/11. For the last year, we've had people in positions of incredible power scapegoating Asian Americans. People with the biggest pulpits spreading this kind of hate. These facts are clear. 6 out of the 8 people killed on Tuesday night were of Asian descent. 7 were women. The shootings took place in businesses owned by Asian Americans. The shootings took place as violent hate crimes and discrimination against Asian Americans has risen dramatically over the last year and more. Racism is real in America, and it has always been. Xenophobia is real in America and always has been. Sexism too. In the 1860s, as Chinese workers built the transcontinental railroad, there were laws on the books in America forbidding them from owning property.
Despite all of the challenges that Asian Americans have faced and continue to face today, a multitude of members of this community have dedicated their lives to serving the U.S. with passion, honor, and courage. Susan Ann Cuddy became the first Asian American female to become a U.S. Navy officer. The torture and murder of Cuddy's father by the Japanese government inspired her to join the U.S. effort to beat Japan during World War II. However, the first time she applied to become a U.S. Navy officer, she was rejected because of her race. The second time she applied, which was after she became Los Angeles City College's first Asian American baseball player, she was accepted and became the Navy's first female gunnery officer. Throughout the rest of the war, Cuddy taught fighter pilots how to shoot down enemy aircraft. Later on, Cuddy became an intelligence officer breaking codes for the Navy and eventually joined the NSA, where she ran a think tank of 300 linguists and other experts gathering intelligence. On February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which resulted in a mass relocation of more than 110,000 persons of Japanese ancestry to remote camps. Entire families were incarcerated in crowded, tar paper barracks in the desolate, windswept desert. Yet even from behind the barbed wire, and despite the fact that many of their own rights had been taken away, thousands of Japanese American men volunteered to fight for their homeland, America. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in the entire history of the U.S. military. In total, about 18,000 men served, ultimately earning 9,486 Purple Hearts, 21 Medals of Honor, and an unprecedented 8 Presidential Unit citations. Major General Long, a political refugee who came to America in 1975 at the age of 9, is the first Vietnamese American to achieve flag rank. Long and his family left Ho Chi Minh City on April 29, 1975, a day prior to the city falling. Since 2018, Major General Long has been in command of U.S. Army Japan and is responsible for 2,500 soldiers, civilians, and family members throughout 16 installations in mainland Japan and Okinawa. Senator Tammy Duckworth is an Iraq War veteran, a Purple Heart recipient, and a former Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. She was also among the first handful of Army women to fly combat missions during Operation Iraqi Freedom. In 2004, Duckworth was deployed to Iraq as a Black Hawk helicopter pilot for the Illinois Army National Guard. On November 12, 2004, her helicopter was hit by an RPG and she lost her legs and partial use of her right arm. Despite this horrific experience, Duckworth served in the Reserve Forces for 23 years before retiring at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel in 2014. She was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016 after representing Illinois' 8th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives for 2 terms. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne Bass, took over as the 19th senior enlisted leader of the service last August. marking a period of change and promising more diversity and inclusion in the ranks. Base's appointment makes the Air Force the first military service to have both a woman and an Asian American in the senior enlisted role, shortly after Chief of Staff General Charles Q. Brown Jr. became the first African American officer to lead a branch of the armed forces. Tomorrow, we will be having an event celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage from 12:30 p.m. to 2 p.m. at the Tiki Hut. There will be a Muay Thai demo and a free food sampling. Unfortunately, the Haka dance performance has been canceled, but the Muay Thai demonstration will demonstrate the rich heritage of how this martial art evolved from Krabi Krabong, which was with the weapons tactics of the Thai army. As a country, we often forget that the US is a nation of immigrants. As we work towards a more equitable and anti-racist era, the journey to undoing existing oppressive systems requires all of us to get more uncomfortable by challenging racial biases and microaggressions while simultaneously celebrating our differences. Together, inspired by the legacy and by the service of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders today in our national defense, we can make 2021 an example of inclusion and unity. The last statement I want to leave you with is a quote from William Sloane Coffin Jr., an American Christian clergyman and a longtime peace activist. Diversity may be the hardest thing for a society to live with, and perhaps the most dangerous thing for society to be without. Thank you for your time, and we hope to see you at tomorrow's event.